This episode of Love Lauren is sponsored by SB Fabrication and Parts. It's time to adjust the chain tension for all three chains. This chain that drives everything we'll leave till last, and we'll adjust with the chain tension adjuster. In this case, the little idler upgrade that I've got on here. But for now, we want to worry about this lower chain that drives the rear roller, and this chain that leads up to the intermediate clutch assembly that slides and pivots. So it slides on this bracket that's attached to the side of the machine, which you probably can't see very well. There's a bolt here coming through and another bolt up here with a nut on either end. So I've loosened those off just to get started a little bit. And what we want to basically be doing here is sort of pulling up and tilting at the same time. So we're trying to get this chain adjusted and this chain adjusted all at once. Not too bad here tension wise, and the one at the back's a little bit loose. If it's too loose, when you roll the machine backwards, it will lock up and you won't be able to roll it backwards, assuming your this bolt passing through your intermediate clutch isn't too tight, which it's not in this case. I've also got a little wedge here. I'm just going to jam behind my rear roller to stop it rolling around on me too much. So we're aiming for 1/4 inch of movement to 1/2 inch of movement. So as I said, I've loosened off the bolt here. I'll just take some slack off the top here as well. And while I'm doing that, you'll have probably noticed that there's some blue tape on either one of these sprockets. So I've been through this process once already, and I noticed that as I was rotating this chain, it would get tight and then loosen off a bit. So at some point in the revolution of this sprocket or that sprocket, something was not quite right and it was just getting really tight. So the advice that I've received is that sprockets are not always round. In this case, this sprocket's brand new. This one's off the original machine. But in other words, they're not always round, and that may be the cause of the problem. Alternative suggestions were that something's not sitting square in terms of the shaft of the reel, or the placement of this sprocket on the reel, maybe the bearings, possibly bearings, this bearing here, or the bearing that sits on the shaft on the intermediate clutch bracket assembly. The general advice that I've received was to adjust for the tightest section, so that's why I've got this blue tape here and here. This is essentially the location in the revolution of the sprocket where the tension is the greatest. So in other words, it's going to slacken off a little bit as it rotates, and that's going to just have to be okay. So what we're going to try to do here is get everything back into place. So this bolt on the front on this machine is a hole, whereas down here we've got a kidney shaped sort of slot for this bracket to slide up and down, pivoting on that top bolt. So I'm going to work from the top bolt initially, just to get the position of that bracket adjusted, because you can see there's some slots here as well, so this bracket will slide back and forth like that. This sprocket is attached to that bracket, so I can use it without getting things in the way to tighten things up. And that's one way to do it. The other way you can do is try and reach through and sort of grab things down here, and it's basically a complicated juggling act where you really need a third hand, and if you don't have a third hand, well, you just got to improvise. Start tightening that off. Let's try that. So what I'm doing is I'm just sighting right down here on the back side of this chain, giving it a little poke every now and then just to gauge tension. So let's try and get this front bolt done. I found with the socket extension here that sort of helps. Just snug that up for a minute and see how we're looking. Looks better on the back now. In terms of our chain tension here, I think it could be a little bit tighter yet. So I'm going to keep going. Let's give this a spin and see what happens. And see how floppy that gets as that blue tape spins around. The concern with over-tensioning your chains is that you're going to wear your sprockets, and specifically the teeth on the sprockets, prematurely. In addition, the engine's going to have to work harder, and the entire machine's just going to be under a little bit more stress. So it's worth getting this set right. As I said, this chain tension's not too bad already, but 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of movement is what we're chasing. You see, when I pull back, that snugs up quite significantly. And it's just a question of keeping it there. Snug that up. It's a bit better. Just feeling now whether we've got a tight spot that we can feel. It's going to interfere with anything. And it feels alright, I think. I think I'm happy with that. Just lock off those two bolts now. That should do it for now. It's worth noting this tensioner sits on this arm down here. And this thing is anchored only on the one point where this fixture for the chain case attaches. So basically there's a square section on that arm of the chain case post that fits through a diamond shaped square section on this silver plate down here. So in other words, getting the tension set on this adjuster is a little bit tricky because when you tighten it, the whole thing just wants to go, wants to flop down. So a little tip is to pop a little offcut of soft wood in between those two sprockets and reverse the cutter, and that will sort of jam in place. So then you can use the cutter as leverage to keep this this idler in place while you lock it off on the back side with your spanner, and then it's not inclined to flop down again as you're working. And then to remove it, roll your cutter forwards and it pops out. The last thing to do to these chains is to get them lubed up and ready to go. What I'm using is Tac 2 adhesive lubricant for chains, bearings and slotting parts. I'm going to work my way up with this stuff. This chain's got a bit of lube on it already, whether it's just a little light oil from the factory or grease, I don't know, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So I'm going to take it light and easy because this stuff's going to come off all over the chain cover if I overdo it. But a little, I'm going to go on the principle a little bit goes a long way. And just for good measure, we'll pop a rag under there as well so we don't make a complete mess. Back. that should do it. Good thing to do when it comes time, once we've got this machine up and running, is just make sure everything's sort of wiped down, because that stuff will attract dirt and grime and that sort of thing, so it's not a dry lubricant, and we don't want any extra gunk going in here. I mean, our chain drive than necessary, especially given the operating environment.